The following video is the first part of OpenKM's new workflow course. The examples will be of gradually increasing difficulty. You are not required to have a technical profile or skills to follow along, although it could ease and speed up your learning process. All the examples are created in OpenKM version 7, and we are using OpenKM's portable development environment to develop the workflows. We encourage using our OpenKM portable development environment rather than configuring your own Eclipse instance, especially for those who are not Java experts. Requirements: to start designing workflow processes in OpenKM, you must have previously configured the JBoss JBPM framework for process languages. JBPM is a toolkit for building business applications to help automate business processes and decisions. It allows you to model, execute, and monitor business processes and cases throughout their life cycle. If you haven't configured the JBPM framework, you can download OpenKM's portable development environment, which provides a pre-configured development platform to start working with minimum configuration required. You can download our portable development environments from our download center, or you can find more information about setting up your own JBPM framework from the links in the description. Once you have all the tools configured, we can start designing workflow processes in Eclipse. Design. First, let's add a new JBPM project in the Project Explorer. To do this, we can right-click on the Project Explorer and select New, Other, JBPM 3 Project. A single project can contain multiple workflows. Let's click on Next. The wizard asks if we would like to have a simple example created. Let's uncheck this box. We can organize these workflows by creating packages. By default, we have some shortcuts to access the most important folders inside our source files. Let's create a package inside our source, main, JPDL path. Now we are going to define our first workflow. A JBPM process is composed of nodes, transitions, and actions. To start, we need to create a process definition. Let's right-click on the package and create New, Other, New Process Definition. This will be the name of our workflow. Let's click on Finish. This creates an XML file, which contains the process definition. The process definition is easily constructed with a flowchart, made up of nodes and transitions. To create the node structure, you can drag and drop the nodes and transitions from the left side of the panel. Nodes define the state of the process, and they are connected by transitions. The first nodes we are going to add are the start and end nodes. The start node defines the process entry point. A process definition must only have one start node. End nodes define the end of the process execution. A process definition may have multiple end nodes. For our first example, we are going to create a simple purchase request process. It will have two internal nodes. These will be user tasks. Task nodes represent one or many tasks executed by a human. You can find a detailed definition of all the available nodes on the links in the description. The first node will be assigned to the user who submits the purchase request. The second node will be assigned to the user who needs to buy the requested product. We will now create the transitions, connecting and directing each stage of the process. To keep an organized structure visually, we can display the grid from the JBPM menu at the top. Now, if we move around the nodes with the Select tool, they will snap to the grid. The end user will be able to see the graphical representation of our workflow inside OpenKM. It's important to assign an appropriate name for each node to help the users and developers keep track of the workflow status. Let's assign the name request to the first node. And let's rename the second node to Purchase. We can also rename the start and end nodes to keep a clean chart. Now that we have finished our visual representation, we need to define what will happen in each stage of the process. A task instance will be created when the process execution arrives at a task node, and the node will enter a wait status. The user will have to notify the conclusion of the task to continue the workflow process. Let's create and define the tasks that will be assigned in each node. Let's click on the Request node and let's access the Tasks tab on the Properties panel. Here, we can add a task by right-clicking on the empty area. Let's add a new task. Each task requires a unique name and it cannot contain special characters. The name of this task will be displayed as a pending task for the users in OpenKM. We recommend naming the task exactly as its related node. Then, let's click on the Assignment tab. There are several options to assign a task. We can assign tasks to actors, pooled actors, swim lane, expression, and handlers. We can assign a task to specific users by selecting the actor option. The pooled actors option assigns a task to multiple users, separated by commas. Swim lanes define an assignment that will remain constant for various tasks in the process. The expression option allows you to assign tasks to groups of users with specific roles. This will create a task that anyone within a specific role can interact with. You can also use the handler for more advanced configurations. In this case, we will keep our example simple, and we will assign each task to a specific user by selecting the actor option. Now, we need to type the actor ID. This field corresponds to the OpenKM username that will receive the task. This field is case sensitive. We need to make sure this user ID matches an existing username in the OpenKM instance where we want to deploy the workflow. We will assign this task to a user with the ID name, user1. And now, let's do the same process with the purchase node. This time, we will assign it to a different user, user2. Now that we declared the assignment, we need to create the contents of the tasks. When we assign a task to a user, it will prompt a form. The forms will contain the description of the tasks. To create the definition of the forms, we will create a new file in the same package. Let's right-click on the package that we are currently using. New. Other. We are going to create a new file. You can type file to find the wizard or search for General. File. Let's create a file called forms.xml. Workflow forms are based on a formal XML definition. The document type definition is specific for each version of OpenKM. You can go to our website to find OpenKM's application version compatibility table. The basic XML skeleton of the workflow forms contains the doc type, which is the formal definition of the DTD, and the workflow forms opening and closing tags. Inside this structure, we will define all the workflow tasks from our workflow. Each workflow task is defined in a workflow form block. Now, we need to assign the attribute task to each block, and add the corresponding name of the task that we defined in the task area of each node. Now that we have defined the forms for each task, we can add different fields to each form. You can add buttons, checkboxes, inputs, text areas, upload buttons, and many others. You can find a detailed list of all the available workflow fields in the links below in the description. The documentation includes the specific attributes that are available for each field and their description. In our current example, the user who requests the purchase must provide some information: product, company name, and value. To do this, we are going to create 3 input fields. Input fields are usually used to type free-form text. They can also be configured to capture text, dates, links, or to select internal folders. We need to add 2 main properties to each input field: label and name. The label contains the text that will be displayed in the user interface for the input field. The name contains the internal unique field identifier that will be used by the system. 2 fields can't have the same name if they are in the same task definition. Let's add the information related to our 3 input fields: product name, company name, and value of the product that the user is requesting to buy. Now we need to add a button to submit the information. Let's add a workflow button field. Let's name it Submit. Buttons can be configured to direct the workflow to specific transitions. This is useful for processes that require manual approval. Now that we finished our request form, let's display the input values in the purchase form. We are going to assign the same input fields to this form, but we are going to add two properties to them. First, the data property to dynamically load the value of the input. We will assign the value of the field name that we want to retrieve from a previous form. Then, we are going to add the read-only property and assign its value to true. This will lock the field to forbid its modification from the user interface. This concludes the design section. We will now configure the deployment parameters. Deployment. Let's save the changes. To deploy the file correctly, we need to select all the files that we will use. Let's go to our process definition and click on Deployment. First, let's add the graphical information file. This file is automatically generated by Eclipse, and it is located at source, main, JPDL. The file name starts with a dot and ends with the extension .gdp.xml. Now, let's add the image file. This is the file that will be used to create the visual representation of the workflow. It is located in the same folder, with the extension .jpeg. We will also need to add the form's definition file to the additional files area. Now that we have everything selected, we can build the compiled file. Let's go back to our diagram, and click on the JBPM menu at the top. Let's click on Save Process Archive, and let's select the location where we want to save the file. This will create a file with the extension .par. Since it is a common practice to create multiple versions of a workflow process, we recommend saving the file in the same folder that we are working on. Implementation. To add the workflow definition file to our OpenKM instance, we need to access the JBPM console. To do this, let's type our OpenKM instance's domain name, followed by jbpm-console. Now we are going to log in with the administrator credentials. Click on Choose a File. Let's select the compiled file we just created. And now let's click on Register Definition. At this point, we can inspect the new registered process to verify that everything looks okay. The system should display the workflow name and version, the process instances that are currently running, the form's definitions, and the process image. If we find any errors here, we can go back to Eclipse and fix the workflow. We can now copy the process name. For the next step, we will log into our OpenKM instance as the super administrator. Let's go to the Administration section and click on Utilities. Workflow Tenant. Let's add a new workflow. And let's register the uploaded workflow in the workflow engine. This name needs to be the same as the process name inside the JBPM console. Now that we have registered the workflow to the OpenKM instance, we need to assign the permissions to interact with the workflow. We can assign the permissions from the Profiles area. In this case, all the users involved in the workflow will be using the default profile. Let's edit its properties. And let's add our new workflow to the Workflows section of the profile. Now we need to refresh the instance to apply the changes. Test. We can now log in as user 1 and test our workflow. Workflows can be started on any node of the repository. In other words, you can start workflows on documents, folders, records, or emails. Let's right-click on a file. Select More. Start Workflow. There is a new notification at the top. If we click on it, it will take us to our dashboard. A new task will appear in the Workflow, Pending Tasks area. Let's start our task, and let's fill in the information requested and submit the form. Users can check the workflow status in the Workflow tab that is in the Properties panel of each file. In this case, we can see that the workflow status is currently at the purchase stage. Now, let's log out from this account and let's log back in as user 2. Let's head to our pending tasks. The purchase task displays another form with the information from the request form. This time, we cannot type any data into the fields, and we can only continue the workflow, which will drive the process to its conclusion. Before we end this workflow instance, let's go to the JBPM console as the super administrator. Here, we can see the status of each workflow. This section allows the super admin to check all the running workflows and the status of each one. Now, let's go back to our user 2 window and let's end the workflow. We can refresh the instance to corroborate that the workflow has finished its course. This concludes the development, deployment, and implementation of our first workflow. In the following videos, we will see how to expand this process and increase its complexity.